When I was about 15, I was eating some cereal and accidentally dropped my spoon onto the kitchen floor. I watched the spoon fall. As it hit the floor, it just vanished into thin air. I was shocked. I thought surely my eyes were playing tricks on me. It must have just bounced away and gone out of sight or something. I spent 30 minutes searching the kitchen for that spoon. I was honestly kind of freaked out. I tried to think of every possible place it could have gone. There weren't many places it could have ended up. I never found it. When I was around 7 years old, I was raised primarily at the time by my grandparents who lived in a rural county in East Texas. I'll never forget one day when we had a most unusual man come by the house one afternoon unexpectedly. I remember there being a knock at the door as I was playing in the living room at the time and called up to announce to my grandparents someone was at the door. My grandmother took a quick peek out of the front window before answering the door, and I remember glimpsing at a very dark-colored or black sedan, unsure of the type, parked outside. Thinking back, I find it odd at the time I couldn't recall hearing it pull up, as I had been playing near that window for some time. My grandmother answered the door, and to the best of my recollection, the man revealed himself to be some sort of door-to-door salesman. My grandmother invited him in and called for my grandfather. I never in my life had seen a man so pale. He was dressed in essentially all black or very dark blue suit, with a matching hat and large sunglasses, which initially made me wonder if he wasn't blind. They reminded me of that type, and one of the saddest excuses for a toupee I've yet to bear witness to. I was totally transfixed on the man, and couldn't get over the stark contrast of his pale skin to his seemingly drawn-on with lipstick, pinkish lips. My fixation became apparent, and my grandmother shooed me into a back room as to leave the men to talk, so to speak, uninterrupted. Throughout the visit, I kept trying to sneak peeks at the man, and commented to my grandmother whether or not she thought he was sick, as he was so pale and thin. Eventually, I supposed, he finished his pitch, and eventually made his way quite slowly for an exit. I recall as he was leaving, he seemingly thanked both my grandparents. I couldn't make out everything that was said, but I recall he did something more odd than his appearance. He seemed to pass his hands in front of both my grandparents' faces, and said something to both, but all I could make out was the word forget, and soon was on his way. My grandparents seemed to be momentarily in a dull fog after closing the door, and the man quietly pulling off. Never saw him drive off. I immediately asked them who was that man, and they looked at each other and said, "What man?" Now, as you can understand, all three of us were quite baffled, them as having no recollection of a visitor, and me having no rational explanation as how in the hell they couldn't remember that freaking wackadoo-looking salesman. I went on for weeks asking them who the man was and trying to jog their memory, and as always, they said there was no one. They even went as far as to say I was mixing up another business acquaintance of my grandfather and had him drop by one day. But I assured him there was no way I could confuse the two, as the man in question was paler than Gollum in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and their friend was nothing of the sort. I had almost forgot about the incident entirely until watching a show on Sci-Fi related to an MIB theme, and it came back to me. As recent as a year ago, I tried bringing it up again when I was home visiting, and my grandfather didn't remember a thing, while my grandmother again didn't recall the strange man, but vividly remembers me asking for weeks on end about a strange man neither of them ever remembered setting foot in the house. This happened back in the mid-80s, and I'm in my early 30s now, looking back, and a lot of the details aren't as crisp, but I know what I saw. I've had a handful of creepy things happen in my life. Here's one when I was around 8 years old and I lived on a military base in Hawaii. My older brother and I used to explore all over the woods and streets, but the oddest place we kept coming back to was the sort of concrete sewer opening that had a metal grate over it. It was located at a dugout ditch by the side of the road. Standing over it looking down, you could see it was a pretty deep drop. So me and my brother used to talk to this thing that lived in the sewer. It started one day when we were dropping rocks down inside it to hear the echo, and then we started yelling into it, and something answered back. It was this echoed noise that sounded kind of like faraway water running in a pipe, but also kind of like the songs whales make, all mixed together. It's really hard to explain. It sounded very faint, but very distinct. So we yelled again, and it responded again. The noises lasted for maybe 5 to 10 seconds, then stopped. Some answers were longer than others. We kept testing it. We were asking it questions like, "Do you live in the pipes? Are you a ghost?" etc. and when we were finished speaking, it would make the sound again. The space of time between our questions and the corresponding sound varied. Sometimes it was immediate, and sometimes there was a short wait. We weren't even freaked out, though. We were kids, and we just thought it was really cool and weird. So we said goodbye and left, but we checked back the next day, and it was still there. We waited in silence before we initiated conversation, trying to listen for the noise, but there was nothing. Then we started yelling, and it started back up again. And so we just kept coming back and talking to it. We always said hello and goodbye. We would experiment with the things we said to see if we got different reactions. Sometimes we would insult it, and then say, "Just kidding," right afterward, being dumb. I would bring my friends to show it off, but they would get creeped out and want to leave. Once my brother and I brought a whole group of kids, but the noise never came back. We were just hollering into the emptiness like idiots, and they all thought we made it up. Then, when I went back to basically ask, "Where were you, dude?" it took like 10 minutes to hear it again. Weirdly, I'd forgotten all about this incident until a couple of years ago. I was so young when it happened that I just accepted it as a bizarre and mundane part of my life. I had entire meaningful chat sessions with this thing. My brother had forgotten all about it too, until I brought it up a couple years ago. The memories came flooding back, and he recalled the same thing I did, but we still have no idea what it could be. I spoke to it all the time, and the last thing I said to it was when I said goodbye because our family was moving. 4 years ago, I'd lived in a very large farmhouse that was converted into 2 apartments. The house was known as the Old Boys' Home. It was used to house boys with behavioral issues, but was closed due to allegations of molestation. Anyway, I was living with my boyfriend and 3-year-old daughter at the time. My bedroom had a large fireplace that had been boarded up and painted over. I decided to push my bed up against it one day while I was rearranging things. It was like a headboard. That night, around 1 a.m., I had heard a small voice saying, "Mom, Mom, Mommy." I had sat up in bed but didn't see anything, so I reached over my boyfriend trying to grab my daughter and put her in our bed. I kept feeling around and I was still hearing the voice, but I couldn't feel her. My boyfriend woke up and turned the bedside lamp on, asking me, "What the hell are you doing?" I explained that Amelia was trying to get in our bed and I was reaching for her. There was nobody there. My daughter was sound asleep in her room. Then the next night came. Around 1 a.m. again, my dog had started to whimper at our door, so my boyfriend got up to take him outside. You know that feeling in a bed when someone lies down next to you, where the bed pushes in and there's a warmth on your back? I felt that, so I assumed my boyfriend had come back to bed. I rolled over. My boyfriend wasn't in the bed, and I felt the bed release pressure. Whatever was laying next to me had gotten up in that second. I moved my bed the next day to the other side of the room, and I never had another incident in the 2 years I remained in that house. I was sitting on my porch and had my debit card on the table in front of me. I went inside to get something to drink. Patio furniture in sight and a 6-foot privacy fence around the yard. I also lived alone. Went back outside, and it was just gone. I searched everywhere, inside and out, but couldn't find it. Nothing was withdrawn from my account, so 2 days later I canceled it and requested a new one. 2 weeks later, I went out to sit on the porch. I did this every day, and the old card was sitting right there on the table. It just f***ing appeared. There was nothing else on the table. It was just gone, and then it wasn't. Got a few replies, so let me clarify. I lived alone. The porch was screened. I literally took off all the cushions on the porch, destroyed my house. The table was your typical glass patio table, and I sat out there every freaking day, and there wasn't anything on it. Then 2 weeks later, it was just sitting there on the table. Nothing was withdrawn from my account. I genuinely have no explanation. I am an outdoorsman. I'm very experienced in hunting, camping, and hiking, and general survival. I'm very familiar and used to wildlife, and I was charged by what I believe was a cryptid, called a dogman. It charged me and my cousin. It was not a bear. A bear cannot move how it did. And it was not a normal wolf, as they can't comfortably run on 2 legs, whereas what charged us seemed natural at doing it. I can elaborate further if you wish. This happened around June or July of 2007, I believe. I was around 17 years old and more cocky then, but still somewhat knowledgeable of the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in northwest Wisconsin. I basically grew up there in the summer. I knew the woods well, but at night it was wise to stay in the cabin, or at least by the bonfire by the beach, because of bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things was if you were having a bonfire, the tree line was visible from the fire pit and beach, and at night you always felt like you were being watched from that tree line. But during the day the woods always seemed normal, not so creepy. That is until this incident. So this happened somewhere between 1200 and 1400. Me and my cousin were having an airsoft battle. I was in full woodland camo. He was not. I retreated onto the ATV trail into the woods for a tactical advantage, and our battle took us about 200 meters into about a third of the way up the trail. We had enough at this point and were standing at the edge of a clearing on the trail talking, and he was maybe 10 feet from me when I decided to mess with him. I shushed him and said, "We're being watched." He froze. Then I realized the woods were dead quiet, and I got spooked and started scanning the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right when I saw it. Its teeth gave it away. It was panting and staring at my cousin. I don't expect you to believe me, but what I saw was a wolf as big as a black bear, at least 300 pounds. But it wasn't normal. This wolf was on 2 legs, crouching next to a tree with its arm grasping the tree, grasping with a clawed hand. It had reddish-brown fur. I told my cousin that we have to go. And next thing I know, he's sprinting, and I looked back at Wolfie, who had locked on and sprinted a few steps on 2 feet, and then I turned and ran when it looked like Wolfie was dropping to all 4s. It charged us and sounded right on our asses barreling through the brush, but for whatever reason let us go when we broke out of the tree line and headed for the cabin. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size. Wolfie appeared to be nearly 7 feet tall when upright, and that where it should have had front paws, it appeared to have large clawed hands. Now, I'm not sure how to explain it away rationally. I have heard wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know they can't sprint on 2 legs, nor do wolves get that big, and black bears more waddle on 2 legs. The closest description is silly, a werewolf or a dogman. Thank you for reading. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button for more content in the future.